All right, folks, as we're sort of getting started here, I'm Steve Murphy. I'm the chair of Casiopa. This message is being recorded. I'm currently making sure I'm admitting people. So you'll see them unfortunately come on the screen share, but it's the only thing I'll have to try to get out of the way here. We're going to have Brian McCaddy, Jen Tiberge, and Sheldon Lambert. I'm going to be in control of the particular screen itself. So they'll be doing sort of what we used to do back in the day, which is asking me to advance the slides. That's the way sort of one person's doing this. Obviously, of course, I've got people on mute on entry as well as not video. So I will keep that sort of going. I will actually take my video off and mute myself during the time when I'm actually not in control of it. And so I'm going to turn it over to the folks in here. This is a wonderful opportunity for people to learn a little bit about Parks Canada's research. We put an emphasis, of course, on Ontario, but we have Jen here to actually talk a little bit about sort of the connection with the national office as well. And so we've got a good opportunity for people to sort of learn a lot about sort of what can happen with it. So as I say, I'm just currently ensuring that we have sort of all kinds of sort of opportunities here for people to do it. Without further ado, what I'm going to do is to max out my particular screen. Again, unfortunately, we'll have the occasional folks coming on with the screen share. So I'll have to be able to move that back and forth in some respects. And I will turn it over to Brian, Jen, and Sheldon to go from here. If you guys would like to take control of the meeting, again, I will advance it from them. And I will simply get you guys get a chance to go. Okay.
Well, thanks very much, Steve. I'm Brian McCaddy, and I'm the Acting Partnering and Engagement Officer for the Georgian Bay, Ontario East Field Unit. And I'll show you a map in a moment, which gives you a sense of the geography on that. I just wanted to begin by thanking Dr. Steve Murphy at Waterloo and the Casiopa whole team and all of you listening either live or as it's recorded in the days ahead, for the opportunity for Parks Canada to come on and update you on some of the research initiatives, the way we do research in the field unit and nationally. We spent some time over the last couple of months updating our research priorities for the 4 parks in our area, and we wanted to share that with you and to have a little dialogue, hopefully towards the end of the presentation, on doing more work together. And as you know, just before I launch into this, knowledge creation is critical to Parks Canada. It's a high priority for us. And managing our parks using the concept of two-eyed seeing is a perspective that we take as well. So Western science, critical to understanding ecosystems, and Indigenous knowledge systems brought forward on the same plane is also the way we do things at Parks Canada. More and more, we're learning, as you no doubt are as well out there, but knowledge creation, managing our parks better, and working on restoration work and species recovery, that sort of thing is critical to us. So maybe I'll go to the next slide, Steve, just to outline the table of contents for our agenda this morning. We're going to start off with Jen Tiberge in a moment. Jen is an ecosystem scientist and ecologist at the Chief Ecosystem Scientist Office, and she'll give us the national perspective on what Parks Canada is working on from a knowledge creation research priority perspective. And then we'll touch on the research priorities for the 4 parks of Bruce Fathom 5 in our field unit. And then Sheldon will provide us sort of an on-the-ground perspective on what it's like to work with Parks Canada, using Thousand Islands National Park as an example, and the research process that you go through when you work with Parks Canada. And then we'll wrap it up and look forward to a discussion going on. Next one, Steve. So here's the Georgian Bay, Ontario East Field Unit. If you can see the lakes as the key to orient you to where you are there, with Georgian Bay in the middle, Lake Huron to the west, and then out to eastern Ontario. So Thousand Islands National Park is out east. Just trying to look at the number for Thousand Islands, but it's out on the St. Lawrence River. near Gananoque. And that's the park out in that location. And then Georgian Bay Islands National Park is near Midland, Ontario, right on Georgian Bay. Thanks, Steve. And both Bruce Peninsula National Park and Fathom 5 National Marine Park are at the tip of the Saugeen Peninsula. So, and you'll also see in there a number of national historic sites. We won't talk about those today, but they have their own research interests. So perhaps there's a history department or an archaeological department in a university with interest as well. So we could certainly talk about that in the days ahead. In fact, we'd love to. Next slide, Steve. So I'll just go through quickly, just a quick profile on the parks. Thousand Islands, as I mentioned, is Eastern Ontario, Kingston and Brockville, and it's got some land-based aspects to it, and then of course a number of islands in the Thousand Islands, St. Lawrence River area. Really interesting, and it's a case for all of these parks. I would suggest parks are never large enough, of course, for especially species that move and migrate and move in larger territories. So the Frontenac Arch Biosphere Reserve, the Algonquin to Adirondacks initiative is really important to St. Lawrence Islands, Thousand Islands National Park for species that move. Along with our Georgian Bay Islands National Park, it's an important reptile and amphibian area recognized by the Canadian Herp Society. So it's got a huge number of reptiles and amphibians, more than many other sites. So that's something to keep in mind. Mentions there the gray rat snake and some other species of note. Sheldon added that it's got a huge invertebrate diversity as well. In fact, the highest of any national park. So perhaps of interest to those out there interested in insects. And then again, on the history, cultural heritage side of things, 109 archaeological sites in the park, and work very closely with the Mohawks of Akwesasne and other bands in the area. Next one, Steve. Georgian Bay Islands, the location we've talked about, it's accessible. Honey Harbor is the access point, and it's part of the 30,000 island archipelago. So islands will be a theme for all of these parks. So it stretches, and there's also a biosphere reserve there as well. So that's another theme common to all of our sites in Georgian Bay, Ontario East. A number of archaeological sites, and in fact, Beau Soleil Island is its own National Historic Site, as well as being the core of the national park. So that's sort of an interesting nuance. A key reptile and amphibian site, herps, and Massasauga rattlesnakes in particular are one of those species at risk, a number of species at risk in all of our parks. Next one, Steve, please. And where I'm based in Tobermory. So I love Bruce Peninsula National Park and Fathom 5 in particular. And it's got some very unique habitats with the limestone bedrock, dullastone bedrock, would local geologists would remind me to say. And the Niagara Escarpment is a key defining feature moving up the Georgian Bay shoreline in particular. And then of course going underwater, heading over to Manitoulin Island and then around through Michigan, the Great Arc part of the escarpment feature. And all the islands in Fathom 5 are actually Niagara Escarpment poking out of the water. And it's got the largest forest left in Southern Ontario, contiguous forest, and some key species there that identified at the bottom. Next one, Steve, please. So at this point, I'm going to turn the presentation over to Jen Taberge. Just should mention that Jen and I are proud environment and resource study undergraduates, once upon a time at the University of Waterloo. So over to you, Jen.
Yeah, that's right. Thanks, Brian. I'm not sure, Stephen, is it possible to turn my video on? And if not, that's okay. I can just proceed with the slides in front of us. So
yeah, Jen, I will do that. I'm going to mute myself and then make sure I can get your video on. So just give me 1 second.
Okay, well, I can proceed regardless. So I'm really glad to have the chance to be involved in this conversation with everyone today. As Brian mentioned, I work within the Office of the Chief Ecosystem Scientist for Parks Canada nationally. But just for your context, I'm situated in the Rocky Mountains currently on the edge of Kootenay National Park. But I am quite familiar with Ontario's parks, as I've had lots of opportunities to work in Ontario parks, various Ontario parks, and also recreate in various parks. So I'm somewhat familiar with the system that you all work with. Did that video come up okay? Okay. So yeah, I can see it's working there. Thank you. One of the primary roles that the Office of the Chief Ecosystem Scientist is undertaking is to ensure the effective development of scientific knowledge. Of course, by using strong scientific knowledge, then we do things that we're able to do things that make sense, right? We know nature better. We understand signals and impacts. We devise better mitigations. And really importantly, we have the opportunity to try to provide the best information possible for evidence-based decision-making. And so one of the ways to get at that, a really effective method to get at that, is to develop scientific knowledge through collaboration with specialists, so folks like yourself. So for me, this is a really useful and timely conversation to have. I want to explore in just a couple of slides here a few perspectives from a national perspective regarding research priorities for Parks Canada. As you know, research questions kind of shift and evolve over time. Sometimes, for sure, sometimes they remain static and remain unaddressed and still need to be addressed. And other times they evolve or new topics crop up. So within the lab that I work within, we're doing a bit of a deep dive currently. And that's to summarize and refresh a little bit these research needs for Parks Canada. And we're looking at this in 4 different ways. They're the 4 bullets that you see on your screen there. First is that we're kind of taking stock of research needs by park. There's many sources of understanding what a park's research priorities or questions might be. They might be the park management plan, for example. They could be listed there. And one really accessible site that folks can view or go search out is on the Parks Canada website. I've got the link there. Yes, that one. Thanks, Stephen. It is on. If you go to that website, that Parks Canada research permit site, then it provides some opportunity to identify which national park specifically you're looking for, and it will list there for you their articulated research needs. We're also in conversation with individual parks, kind of in this stock-taking exercise regarding what sites see as their evolving research priorities. So where do they see they need to go as topics kind of seem to evolve over time? You know, what do the sites see as knowledge gaps for these evolving pressures, and how do we best address them, and how do we set up partnerships and collaborative initiatives to begin to address those? So that's kind of the taking stock, the current needs the park is articulating, and the evolving pressures they see they need to begin to get into. And then thirdly, we've started to focus our line of questioning about this, looking a little bit further forward into the horizon, more of a horizon time frame. So 15 to 20 years, 15 years or so out into the future. Parks Canada collaborated with CIPSL recently. CIPSL, the Canadian Parks Collective for Innovation and Leadership. And with them, we set up a panel of protected areas, sort of interested parties, experts, and the academics, the folks who really want to figure out how we can move the kind of conservation agenda forward through protected areas. And so we collaborated with them in a crowdsourcing and debate kind of format, following a methodology that has been coined by Bill Sutherland. And we're specifically looking at identifying emerging issues in that horizon, sort of 15 years out, the time frame that we don't usually work within, frankly, looking further out than usual and identifying emerging issues that have the potential to impact ecosystems and ecosystem services. And the utility in looking so far out is that it helps decide now what sort of research we might need for pressures that we see that are coming. And we can devise research questions now, hopefully to figure out things like potential mitigations, or begin to devise policy that will prepare us, or maybe even prevent, worse or further future environmental degradation. So that happened this past winter, and if you come back to the CIPSL website, there will be a report, kind of a publication summarizing the suite of research questions and needs that we think, as a group, collectively, we think that hold some merit to investigating and coming up now. And then finally, the fourth pillar that we wanted to look at in understanding or kind of taking stock again about where our national research priorities are going is to begin to seed a little bit of funding to help move some of these research questions forward, begin to explore them, and then fine-tune them into other areas, say like restoration or further questions to help refine our knowledge. So in particular, we have the group that I work with has been funding a small fund to help move forward questions that are really dealing with innovative research, looking at novel ways of approaching complex conservation questions to begin that kind of furthering that knowledge base of where we need to move to next in terms of understanding. Steve, I'll get you to move to the next slide. And the next slide, we'll be talking about just diving a little bit more into that question of funding. So much of the funding that we're able to move right now is internal to Parks Canada. It resides, or it's generated from the Nature Legacy Initiative, which is unfolding across government. But the approach that Parks Canada takes with it is fairly collaborative. So we feel that we can get further with having more integrated research systems and collaborations with academics and NGOs and experts in various fields. So collaboration for sure, and partnership is a significant theme. And there are several different aspects to the funding that's unrolling from within Parks Canada. One is this applied science that I was talking about regarding more innovative and novel approaches to getting at new ways of getting at conservation questions. But also some of the other topics that are available for funding and collaboration are kind of the suite that you might think about these days: ecosystem restoration and species at risk, connectivities, particularly between protected areas, moving sustainability or encouraging sustainability out into a larger landscape. Climate change, particularly not just impact, but research and work regarding actual adaptation. There are projects that really focus as well on that involve indigenous folks or incorporate indigenous perspective into their work, and planning approaches that are targeted more towards integrated planning in that conservation context. So that's a really brief snapshot, a summary of our deep dive that we're currently working on these national research needs. It's definitely a work in progress, and we are just in the process of beginning to collate our preliminary findings. But with that note, I just want to flag that I'm interested. My lab in the that I work within with the Office of the Chief Ecosystem Scientist is interested in hearing your thoughts as practitioners. Thank you, Stephen. Particularly that you can provide comments by email to that email address at the bottom. So we're interested in things like how do you feel that we should best address research questions in an environment today, which is really changing? There's pressures and environments are changing at a more rapid rate than we've experienced before. And secondly, if you were looking to become involved in Parks Canada's research program, contribute to our knowledge acquisition initiative, then what makes it accessible for you? What sort of places are logical or accessible for you to take a look at to become updated with where Parks Canada is going with research? Or what type of information is useful for you to know about regarding the research questions and approaches that Parks Canada is interested in taking? So any feedback, anytime to that particular email link would be quite welcome. And that's my summary of the deep dive. I'll send that back to maybe Brian.
Thanks very much, Jen. That was great. And Steve, I guess the next slide with the links to the 2 pagers we have for each of the parks. That's that's the slide I can speak to. This is an initiative that began probably about a year and a half ago, and it was we know that the research priorities on our park websites and therefore on the national site are behind the times and don't reflect our current research interests. So we went through an initiative in the 4 parks that we have with the resource conservation managers, Sheldon being one of those, to identify what the priorities are. And we've got sort of a top 5 and then some supplementary priorities as well. So I don't think we need to spend a lot of time looking at those. I don't know if we want to have a go, Steve, at trying to hit one of the links, just maybe the Bruce Fathom 5 one, just to show people what it looks like.
I can do that. I will do that. I will mute myself here, and but I should add this a bit of a lag, folks. As you can see, we are bringing it up.
Yeah,
this is not your computers. This sometimes is how long it takes within Zoom to actually have the link activated. So, Brian, you can keep going a bit if you want to, or you can wait a second and we'll get this thing up here.
Yeah, maybe just a little more background. I'll take advantage of the lag. These are they all look the same, and they've got all the same information. Go to those sites, and those sites, by the way, are on those park websites. So you can learn more about the park, of course, when you're on the website.
Brian, did you want to speak third to that, or do you want me to exit out of this?
Yeah, if it's not coming up, I can just touch on the kind of information that's on there, Steve.
It should be on the screen, or at least I can see it on mine. As to whether or not you folks can see it is sometimes questionable in Zoom. It is up on my screen, just to let you know. Sometimes Zoom doesn't capture it, so.
Yeah, I don't see it on my screen.
Here, just give me 1 second. There we go. Give me 1 second here.
There we go. I can see it now.
Yeah, it's supposed to go on automatically. I had to actually manually do it. So there we go, folks. We've got it up.
So that shows you where it is on the Bruce Peninsula National Park website as an example. And I don't know if we're able to move around or not on that. That's great, Steve. So just some background on the park itself. In this case, 43 species of orchids and the kind of stuff I touched on earlier. The karst landscape, limestone, and the Great Lakes endemic species, particular species at risk, dwarf lake iris, queen snake, that sort of thing. And then each of the 2 pagers has those 5 key research priorities, which the resource conservation managers and their ecologist colleagues have identified as the priorities for the parks. In this case, Bruce Fathom 5 or Bruce Peninsula and Fathom 5 sort of work together as one park, effectively as one ecosystem. And then it touches on the importance of working with Indigenous partners, because that's a high priority for Parks Canada. I know in our case, we have the opportunity to work with the Saugeen Ojibwe Nation, and all of the research permits, the research requests, the approaches we're taking. We work through them. We've got a working group that meets every 2 weeks, and we make sure that they're aware and receive their comments on the research that's proposed, which is critical for us. We're working on a brand new management plan for both the parks, and we're co-developing that with the Saugeen Ojibwe Nation, and I know other parks are doing the same. And then it talks about the multi-year data sets that we have, which are on that national site, and Sheldon might touch on that more in a moment. And then the second page has got the supplementary research interests, a number of other bullet points, which it's hard to pick the top 5. So those are a number of other items, interests that we have, and then the contacts. In this case, Kevin Harper and Tricia Robbins are 2 ecologists at Bruce Fathom 5, who you want to touch base with if you have an interest in these types of research, or of course your own ideas on research that might fit into Bruce Fathom 5 or Thousand Islands or Georgian Bay Islands. So have a look at those links when you get a chance at your leisure, and let us know what you think. This is Bruce Fathom 5, but really interesting stuff going on at Georgian Bay Islands and of course Thousand Islands. So that's good for me now, Steve. And if I can mute, and I'll turn it over to Sheldon Lambert, who's the ResCon manager at Thousand Islands National Park.
Okay, and just wait for Steve to bring that up. And next slide.
Maybe Jen, if you can shut down your video, and we can get a look at the good-looking Sheldon Lambert.
One.
Yeah. Hi, folks. So I'm joining you from hot and sweaty Mallory Town, which is where our park office is located. A lot of what I'm going to talk about, if there's people on the line that have done research in national parks, it won't be new to you. But if you haven't done research in national parks, it will be, and this is a bit of a toolkit, things you need to be aware of when you work with us. And part of my first part is going to be a bit of a sales pitch about why you should endure the paperwork to do work in a national park. So there'll be lots of opportune times at the end for questions. So this is just meant to open up and explain some of the nuances of doing work with us. The big advantage is we offer a fair bit of supports. I mean, Georgian Bay Islands, Bruce Fathom 5 has housing. It's a bit more complicated during COVID, but we do have housing at those sites for researchers to come in, which is often a bit of a deal breaker for folks, that they can come in and have a place for their master's students or undergrad honor students to stay and do work, or professors who are looking to do something on sabbatical and they want to pursue a particular research interest. All of our sites, typically with researchers, we would offer free docking, particularly for GBI and Thousand Islands. That's a bit of a challenge, especially the park's pretty busy, so docking can be quite expensive. So we usually try to accommodate that. Often, because people want to camp close to their work sites, there's obviously campsite arrangements that typically would be provided gratis for work that's related and serves a park purpose. And we often have buildings that where sensitive equipment can be stored, and in some cases most of our sites have some lab storage as well too, for sample storage in the interim. We do under certain situations, depending on how busy we are and how much they need to go, we do offer boat transport to remote sites. Just last year, and I think the picture that was presented earlier showed researchers from Parks Canada and Gabrielle from University of Ottawa doing work on water snake out on Main Duck and Yorkshire Islands, which are 2 islands out in the middle of Lake Ontario, so not on the river. And we're looking at unique DNA related to that population, which is quite promising now, similar to Lake Erie water snake. So those are the types of things that we can provide accommodation for, which basically helps alleviate some of the challenges and costs with doing research. Again, I spoke about the lab facilities. We have technicians that are usually interested in helping out in certain situations, depending on the amount of requirement. one of the big selling points that we have is that we often have very direct and strong personal relationships with Indigenous communities that we work with. In my case, I work at Mallorytown, and we've been working with the Mohawks of Akwesasne since about 2007. And so we're able to sort of be a conduit in on projects with that organization, and particularly on deer research, medicinal plant harvesting. We've done a lot of different work with them, and certainly obviously with people who are interested in cultural research, particularly archaeology. One of the things that we're not really talking a lot about here, but most of the national parks have large multi-year data sets, and that covers most of our ecosystems that we have to report on for State of the Parks reporting. So we're looking at trends and changes in that, but there's usually a plethora of other information that's in there that is a treasure trove for people looking to do honors or master's thesis to pull that research out and or pile on top of it. The sites are often co-located. So you might have a aquatic site that also has water temperature, water chemistry, and those things often aren't always matched up to look at a cohesive whole about what the picture may be saying. And I think that the big advantage of those multi-year data sets, we also have species at risk data. Gray rat snake in our situation is probably one of the older data sets on gray rat snakes in the country going back to the early 80s. And that really allows us to see trends over time, and it's funded and basically been used in multiple different research projects by research partners over the years. As I sort of said, and Jen alluded to it, we have access to nature legacy funding, which in some cases, you know, we've got one project that's a multi-million-dollar project, and other ones that are, you know, typically smaller in dollar value, but often we're holding the money, but we would distribute that money through contribution agreements or other types of financial arrangements. So it's a way to actually potentially fund research, especially where it's directly applied to our research needs. I think a big selling point of our work is that we have large outreach audiences. We have, you know, large social media interest in a lot of work that we do. We've been involved in a lot of documentaries. Our website is pretty heavily used, so it's actually a good way to leverage out and promote a particular research interest that you might be doing in your own programs. So with that, if I could advance to the next slide, I'll grab water. So here's the downside, is that obviously working in a national park requires a little bit more in terms of the approval process. Typically, we require an approved research permit, and depending on the complexity of that and whether we need to consult with our Indigenous partners or whether there's a species at risk permit that's required in it, that can take anywhere from, you know, a couple weeks to several months. So, and you have to account for that. And the first step is to really reach out to those park research coordinators, have a little quick discussion, and then they'll help sort of give you a little bit of a ballpark about, you know, the time allowance that you're going to need to sort of make that happen. You know, it's not as easy as sort of showing up and sort of saying, hey, I want to do something this weekend. It does, even under basic projects, does take a week or two just to get through permitting. And obviously, any research that requires animal handling, Parks Canada has an national animal care committee that reviews anything that requires use or holding of wildlife. If you were collaring animals for a particular sort of tracking study, they meet once a month. So typically getting them in a queue, it's about 6 weeks to get through that process too. And it's obviously easier if you've got your own university or organizational care permit, but Parks Canada's Animal Care Committee still does require a look-see at from their own perspective to sign off on it. As most people know, COVID, no surprise there. There's extra approvals required there, particularly if we were bringing people into sites or bringing people on our boats to transport them. There's you know, more nuances with that right now, and so it's a bit more paperwork. But I think as COVID goes on, that sort of requirement will disappear, and we'll be back to the first 2 points I've raised. So in terms of resourcing a project, you know, there's lots of opportunities for in-kind support, and you know, we can usually provide those things informally or formally via letter quickly. a lot of times if people are making an application, they want a in-kind support. We can usually turn that around pretty quickly. In terms of a funding application, particularly where it's of the core research interests of the park in terms of addressing a problem. We have done partnership agreements with several organizations that also speeds up this process of helping provide resources to research partners. There's a couple different ways that we fund research with research partners, and obviously we do contracts, which is requires people to be registered as a vendor in the national park system. The plus of that is that once you're in there, it basically is applicable to any national park in the country, and so it's basically just a extra paperwork to provide a method of payment. Basically work with the provinces and provincial parks. There's a bit easier of a process to transfer funds there, and it typically is a provincial transfer funding process that we would have to follow that also allows us to move money around. But a big way that a lot of national parks fund and take money that they may get and then sort of pass it off to a university partner through contribution agreements. And those can take a bit more time to get involved because the government is, careful about how it distributes its money. I will sort of say that funding under 25,000 within a year is a little more flexible in the sense that it's approved by our local field unit superintendent in Ontario. Anything that's over $25,000 in value typically is going to be a bit more process approval heavy because it has to go above us. There's letters that typically have to be sent out to the local members of parliament and other folks to inform them about that contribution agreement, and it has to be registered on a database. So it's easily done. We do it all the time, and for folks on the call who haven't done it, it can be frustrating, to get through the first time. But once you've got the process down, it's pretty straightforward and discernible. So next slide. And so some of these are links of interest, and again, maybe I'll post those into the chat so people can peruse them if during the question and answer period if they had questions. But there's a direct, our research and collection permitting system is online. The link for it is there. That brings you right in to do the actual application. It always helps to reach out to somebody beforehand, but we occasionally do get research permits to come in directly. We have an online application process that's provided for the Bruce there. Research coordinators are listed, I think, in one of those links there as well too. In our park, most of the researchers typically would deal with our park ecologist, Josh Van Weeren, Cavan, or Martha would probably be involved at the Bruce, and Prabir Roy would probably be who you would be dealing with at GBI. And I spoke briefly about the data sets. I've given a link to 1,000 Islands data set, but you can query by individual park, and a lot of our data now where there's not sensitivity implications to it is freely available. So, obviously we like to be informed if our data is going to be used for publication, but it is available for you to peruse and use on that open data. And I think as time is going on, we're actually going to be probably putting more of our data sets online so that assumptions and statements we're making about our data for State of the Parks report can be independently verified. So I think it's part of the overall strategy that the federal government is going with to make that data more open to the public. So with that, I guess I'll turn it back to Brian, and I'll post the links of interest in chat function that people can peruse while they're doing any Q&As.
Thanks very much, Sheldon. That was wonderful. Just before we go to questions, just wanted to pick up on one thing that Sheldon said. The whole area of agreements, whether they be contribution agreements or memorandums of understanding or other mechanisms to work together. That's my area of expertise as the acting partnering and engagement officer for the field unit. So if you have questions about those, let me know. We have contribution agreements, for example, right now with, I think there's 2 with Trent University for work in Fathom 5 and Thousand Islands. And we've got a memorandum of understanding with Lakehead University, which facilitates discussions. And there's lots of other things that we can do together. So although it's process stuff, I work on it every day, so I can sail through it fairly quickly. So with that, Steve, I think we're good to move to the last slide, and just once again thank everyone for joining us this morning, and in the days and weeks ahead as the recording is watched, and thank you very much, Steve, for facilitating this, and Casiopa as a group, which is just a wonderful group for us to work with. And I'm hoping that people can connect with us and you have some questions and ideas now. Thanks.
All right, I've unmuted myself again and put the video on as well. So what I will do is to give people a chance to sort of, if we want to start, what I can do, as you can see people popping on the screen there, I can give people a chance to sort of ask some questions. And one of the things that I can certainly facilitate here is with the whole group is if you want to sort of send it into the chat, which I believe you should have access to, if asking questions, we can do that. If that doesn't work, I can start to unmute people as well. I recognize most of the names, so I'm less worried about somebody zooming in to take over the Zoom call. So if anybody's got any questions specifically, let me know on this one, and we'll see if anybody sort of pops in there. If not, I will start unmuting people to see if people actually just want to jump in. I actually will do that. Zoom sometimes sort of has a an opportunity to sort of do it. So if you'd like to, what I will do is I will allow you to, I'll ask all to unmute, as you can probably see in the screen there as well. And you can actually unmute yourself at this point. If there are any questions, go forward. If not, we may have a shorter meeting, which is always good for our participants here. One of the things I will mention is I've actually done this not only as somebody who facilitates research with Casiopa, but also someone who has students who've done research, and myself have done research, and the permitting process, as Sheldon described it, can be somewhat difficult to navigate, although I've certainly found it to be quite easy to do so, even in the before times when you had to do this a little bit more sort of with paperwork style, actual physical paperwork. So it's been a bit easier, I think, with the online approach, actually. As Sheldon mentioned, COVID complicates things a bit, but it's usually pretty straightforward. And as Sheldon and Brian then mentioned as well, it's also useful, I think, sometimes to reach out to the local coordinators just to kind of get your ducks in order to sort of find out, if that's going to be something of interest. There's, of course, the listed interest now that we provided with, which is wonderful, and we can go from there. So again, if anybody has any particular questions, you do have the opportunity to unmute, and I will simply allow you to sort of do an ask all to unmute if you actually want to do that as well. We may have people who have just sort of got what they needed out of that, and the recording will do fine. So from there, I'll give it another couple of minutes. There we go. Getting a couple of new messages coming up here. Budget. Oh, there we go. Yes, indeed. Okay, so I got a couple of questions actually here. Alistair's actually asked one. Alistair, I'm going to put you actually on. I'm going to ask you to unmute there. You've actually got a question. And there you go.
Hi there. How's everyone?
All good, I think, actually, Alistair. This is Alistair McKenzie, if you can't see on there. He's got a question on this one.
Yeah, thank you very much for your great presentation. And it's really sort of inspiring to see you guys looking so far into the future. I think we in Ontario Parks strive to do this, but one of our major hindrances is the fiscal infrastructure that we face, being a parks agency that funds our operations from user fees. And we have very limited sort of financial tools to be able to work past a 12-month cycle. So I'm just curious how you guys address this when you're looking at long-term multi-year projects? And if you have any sort of suggestions as to how to tackle this very major sort of structural limitation for us.
So to summarize, this is in the chat. Alistair's question, sort of what comes down to it, does Parks Canada, as an agency, have a special purpose account or other means to handle the challenge for multi-year projects? That is to say, can you go past end of fiscal year? This comes up all the time in universities as well. So that is the question. I'll turn it over to Sheldon, Brian, and to Jen, if you have any particular insights into that.
Do you want to go first, Brian, and then I can add on to it, or? I think Brian is on mute, but I think Brian can speak to this. But one of the things contribution agreements are often multi-year, and those multi-year agreements give us the flexibility to cost manage and sort of lock in that sort of funding level of support. We do have that, challenge of carrying funds between year, and depending on the individual way that the money is received, that's often there can be different rules about the carry forward on it. I think the one thing I would sort of say is that, anticipated carryover, we receive funding like all other organizations. If you're receiving it in August, with the fieldwork season happening in August, that does often, what results in that sort of issue of carryover. And we haven't had many issues with carryover. It was the earlier we can market, the better. But there are particular funds that don't allow carry forward, and it has to be spent within year. And so it's really a fund by fund answer. So I think that the contribution agreements is often with universities take some of that guesswork out of it, because it's signed off by our field unit superintendent or our executive director, independent of any sort of financial arrangements. That's a bit of a financial authority and a commitment to those funds, so it locks it in a bit more. We do also have sometimes received funding from outside sources. And similar to what you're talking about, it's a special purpose fund, and the way that it works with us, an example, we had a donation to do tree planting that sort of sits, and we individually as an entity with at our sites, we can carry that over any number of years, and that provides a fair bit of flexibility as well. But yeah, it's a challenge with any government work, but I think from what I understand, the federal government rules are a little more amenable to carry over in that regard.
Just to let folks know, Brian is having trouble, is not even able to unmute, so I'm attempting to do so right now. I'm going to give you one shot here. So far, it's gone smoothly. I figured we had to have something in it that was going to actually sort of cause us a bit of a problem. So I'm currently, as you'll probably see on the screen, actually trying to sort of do this as well. See if it actually tries again. Okay, Brian, I've made an attempt here to get you to unmute here. There we go. I think we have Brian back. Nope. It'll unmute him for a second and actually sort of put him back on there, actually. I will keep trying. If anybody's got other questions, I'm going to try to get poor Brian to sort of be able to get unmuted. It doesn't seem to allow me to do so for reasons I have not quite understood here. There we go. Let's say we always have one of these little problems out on this side of the equation, and God knows that if it happens. All right. If anybody has other questions, I am still trying to get Brian able to unmute, and we'll see if I can actually call him up here and go from there. That's not bad. We made it towards the end almost without sort of any technical glitches, so we'll sort of see what happens. Brian, I'm going to try to make you the host, and we'll see if that works. And if it doesn't, we're towards the end, so you never know what happens, actually. That should allow you to unmute. You never know. All right, it's not allowing him to do anything. He may have a little bit of a technical glitch there, obviously. I'm going to reclaim the host position here. and go from there. Does anybody have any other questions? I apologize to Brian as we can't get him to unmute actually on this side of it. Yes, indeed. Jen, you're also trying to comment here, so I'm going to try to get you to unmute here as well.
Okay.
There we go.
I think maybe you can hear me. Well, just to fill a little airtime, since I always like being on the soapbox, I just thought I would add to Sheldon's comment, which was a couple things. I think comments from Brian might be really useful, because my understanding is, say, things like contribution agreements can go for more of a multi-year kind of approach. And so I think some of those folks, the biology contacts are really important to kind of generate the ideas. And then you've got folks like Brian, Brian's a great great resource, because he also can talk the ecology side, but also then can leverage the opportunities and stick handle some of those challenges in handling those multi-year type approaches. And my suspicion is that contribution agreements might be able to help in that regard. But we've had lots, as I've visited with folks, had conversations across the country this last year on this particular kind of topic. It is a real concern that that people get to that really esoteric kind of deadline, and it doesn't really work for the types of systems that we're trying to research. And then you're left scrambling to spend money at the last minute, especially when you've got layers like this year of things like extenuating circumstances like COVID coming in. So what we've advised parks to do where it's possible in their research projects is to try to create if they take a much bigger project, to try to break it down into bite-sized pieces, that portions of some topics could be funded 1 year and portions another year. And over time, you're moving different facets of the research project forward. And some parks have been able to make that work quite effectively for them. But I think Parks Canada as a whole acknowledges it is really clunky for research, not if you can't cast sort of 3 to 5 years out in the future, it limits the types of questions we can really get at and the types of research.
I don't know if, can you hear me now?
Yes, actually,
Yes.
Brian. It
Okay, yeah.
looks like the interface was actually having problems with you on both ends, so I think we got it solved.
Yes, I won't dwell on this point because good comments from both Sheldon and Jen, but certainly, yeah, multi-year. We've got a 5-year contribution agreement at the moment with Trent, for example, on our Together with Gigonak project in Fathom 5, which is about lake whitefish with the Saugeen Nation radio telemetry project, or fish telemetry project with Trent. And we've got a project with Sheldon as well on deer monitoring and movement. And although, government stuff is always, oh my goodness, we have to deal with the federal government. I've been surprised, don't tell anybody else, but our reporting system is actually quite easy with contribution agreements. And we can amend them without too much difficulty. Even the topics can be amended as long as the dollar amount doesn't change. So I think that's kind of nice. So there's lots of positive stuff, and I do these things every day, so they're complicated, but I do them all the time, so they're not complicated to me. And our national contributions team, who I work with, they're fabulous to work with, very flexible and super responsive. So of all the stuff about the federal government, my experience has been contribution agreements have been pretty darn easy. And we also can work on advances as well, and build in advances to the projects, so you get money in the short term. So good news.
Yeah, I'll say this from the perspective of not the Casiopa chair, but as a researcher at university, I found working with Parks Canada, federal government in general, and I'll also say the same thing regardless of whichever government it is, actually at the provincial level as well, and the federal one. I generally had less problem with this sort of approaches. So I know we all like to bash, but I will say that as much as anybody can do this, actually, it seems to be sort of a pretty smooth process out there. There's always the complications, as you three mentioned. I mean, especially if you're working in an area where there might be First Nations archaeological issues or anything like that. Yes, it can be quite complicated, but it should be. I mean, we've seen recent examples of why it should be. So there are good reasons for that, and I think those are something that I think Parks Canada and indeed the provincial counterparts have been quite sensitive to as well. So the permitting process, is sort of, I think it's sort of hit the right note in terms of where that all is. If there are other questions, by all means, we're about 5 minutes from the end here. I won't keep our guests or all of you out there much longer than that, of course. Just a reminder, this is being recorded and will be archived. Our service provider is having a bit of problems with our website, so it's somewhat offline right now in terms of trying to put the stuff up, but I do have a YouTube channel that this can be viewed at, and I'll probably send that out on LinkedIn and Twitter, so at least people can sort of see it. If there's anything else, people can unmute themselves. You're allowed to do that, and or you can put it in the chat. If not, we'll wrap it up in a minute or so.
Steve, I was just going to ask whether anybody's doing work on reptiles and amphibians, because that's a huge focus for our field unit at the moment. We have significant funding too for some of the projects. So that would be just a general question if either today or if you wanted to get in touch with myself or Sheldon afterwards.
And that's one of the things I can certainly put in some of the synopsis. I'll provide a synopsis when our website decides to function again, to be able to do that. And I can actually highlight exactly that point. So they don't have to go through the whole recording to find it, which is sort of useful, but that way you guys can get a little bit more enthusiasm. And again, if anybody on the audience, and there are a few people who've done a little bit of work with this that I see, you're more than welcome to sort of raise that now, or even just get in touch, obviously, with Sheldon and Brian in particular.
And I wanted to add to Sheldon's comments, Fathom 5 is launching a smart buoy, a smart buoy, depending how you pronounce that, with all kinds of monitoring modules on it. We're working with Environment Canada on that. And of course, these are across the Great Lakes, but we'll have the latest and the best in Fathom 5 later on this summer as COVID allows the launch to happen. So that'll be neat to look at all the different data sets that we'll start developing over time in Fathom 5.
All right, I think we've got the questions exhausted for now. My experience has been with these recordings from what we've done previously is that there have been quite a lot of follow-up questions, although I'll make sure that we don't have people send 1,000 emails to you. I think particularly, Jen, you sending in the email that sort of specifically talks about the research interest helps a lot. That way you don't get sort of a lot of folks actually just randomly emailing you, although the crowd that I see before me on the screen are all comprised of professionals, so I don't really have any problems with that on this side of it. Again, I think there's a good process you put up there with active links, and so that will be provided as well. I'll put a PDF together and ensure that people can actually access those so fairly easily. They'll also be embedded into the YouTube videos. When I put them up on the link, will strip out the linkage specifically to some of the stuff on the slides, and that way people can actually have them actively in the sort of commentary below without having to go through the even the PDF actually as well. That should facilitate anybody asking about research from there. So I want to thank Sheldon and Jen and Brian for participating, and all of you in the audience for doing the same sort of thing. Very nice to having everybody out here. And again, you'll have this as a recording available up on the YouTube channel, regardless of the website's disposition. If you need to help finding that, because it is something I actually hide, I don't have as a public one until sort of a bit later when people get a chance to review it and things like that, I can send you the link via email. It's not a problem. You just have to email me, screen name stephen.murphy@uwaterloo.ca. You'll get a hold of me and I can send you the link from there. If there are any parting words of wisdoms, folks, we can do that. If not, I will conclude it.
Well, just thanks very much, Steve, for organizing this. And Casiopa is a fantastic organization. So we look forward to working more with Casiopa in the days and weeks ahead. And thanks very much to Jen from the national office perspective, which is critical. We understand that. And Sheldon on the grounds, you know, what's life like as a ResCon manager and getting work done, which is where it all happens. So thanks.
And thank you both as well from there. All right, I will wrap this all up. Thank you very much. And again, I'll have this recorded. It'll take a little while for the recording to actually cure, shall we say, and finish up. And I will let everybody go. Thanks a lot. Go grab some lunch for those of you who are in the time zone that I am. Jen, you actually have a few hours before that, so go from there. Thank you, everybody. I'm going to conclude
Yeah.
the meeting. Bye-bye, everybody.
Bye-bye. Thanks.